What is it about being told you can't see something that makes people want it so bad? Normally boring, unremarkable, and even bad pieces of media that would pass you by without a thought suddenly become the most exciting thing in the world when you're told you're not allowed to see it. Hey, there's like a 5-second bumper of SpongeBob as a zombie that aired on Nicktoons in 2011. Huh? Okay. It's lost media. I'll kill everybody in this room unless I can see it. The thought of a whole production, like a TV show or movie, game or song, going up in smoke is crazy to me. All that time and effort from potentially dozens of people to make something, and in the end, poof, the finished product vanishes. I've always been really interested in lost media, and especially the hunts that follow, and I wanted really badly to talk about some myself. And then I had an issue. See, I kinda hate the modern definition of lost media. You look and see what some of the most popular lost media cases are, and you see stuff like pilots, betas, and test screenings. I don't know about you, but that doesn't feel as much like lost media, more like media we were never supposed to see in the first place. To me, lost implies we had it at one point, and now can't access it. TV show pilots and video game betas were never intended to be released to the public, so how can we lose something we never had? We were never intended to see stuff like the Backyardigans pilot or the uncensored version of Sailor Mouth. So to me, those don't really count as lost media. Now don't get me wrong, the people who catalog betas and pilots are definitely doing important work, and it's great to see. But it's not really lost to me. A lot of people also misunderstand lost as lost to me. As in, because they don't get access to something, that means it's lost. A game like PT is off storefronts, but definitely preserved. No way I'd consider that lost, even though I don't have immediate access to it. Lost media is also host to a load of dead-end cases or straight-up hoaxes, whether somebody is misremembering something or intentionally making up a case for people to get confused by. Some of the most famous lost media cases, like Go for a Punch and A Day with SpongeBob, are so obviously fake, but have years-long hunts that have gone along with them. That's what I'm looking for when I look for interesting lost media. I want to look for stuff that was at one point publicly available, that is otherwise totally lost, and, if possible, is real. Stuff like the Phantom Blood movie or Slamfest 99, those are what interest me. These are lengthy, interesting, and totally missing. When looking for cases like this, though, one that I saw early and paid little mind to refused to leave my head. Something about its poster, the story behind it, and the total lack of information left me enchanted by the mystery. And seeing as nobody else has discussed it, I decided, what the heck. This is the story of the Xevious movie. The story of this movie, and how it became lost, doesn't start with the game Xevious, but instead with the man responsible for it, Masanobu Endo. Born in Tokyo on February 23rd, 1959, Endo's game design journey began after graduating from college and getting a job at Namco in the year 1981, which for somebody looking to cut their teeth was a great time to get aboard. Namco was on a generational run of arcade games, including Pac-Man, Galaga, and Pole Position. But that didn't mean that everybody else was just sitting on their hands, as Konami had found massive success with their arcade game Scramble, a side-scrolling shooter that sold over 15,000 arcade units and was considered the first entry in the now famous Gradius series. Despite having both Galaxian and Galaga under their belts, they still felt the need to get to work on a game made to counter Scramble, and that was the project Endo would start out on. He would be tossed in the deep end, though, when a restructuring of the team left him to steer the ship all on his own. Namco had caused the head planner and senior designer of the project to quit the company, which meant that now Endo would have to design illustrate, and program the game, despite not being a designer, illustrator, or programmer. Hey, sport, welcome aboard at McDonald's. If I don't see you manning the register, deep fryer, and sign twirling outside by tomorrow, I'll eat you. Despite the inexperience of the team, Endo especially, Xevious would end up being full of features that were unthinkable at the time for a side-scrolling shooter. The game is made up of 16 different stages, each made up of a screen that seamlessly blends into the next level. That made it look like the game of Xevious was one massive, uninterrupted playfield, which complemented just how different Xevious looked compared to everything else. The game was one of the first space shooters to not be set in space, instead setting itself on Earth and including various landmarks, like forests, roads, water, bases, and even the famous Nazca lines of Peru. The game's enemies were also a cut above the average space shooter, outdoing games like Namco's own Galaxian by having them react realistically to the player, rather than moving in patterns like in Galaxian. The ships would come out in a much more erratic and unpredictable pattern as opposed to Galaxian, where they would come out in set waves, and they would adjust their positioning to try to get as close to the player as possible, fire off a shot, and if they miss, beat a hasty retreat off screen. The game would also adjust what enemies you fight depending on how you were playing in the game. If you proved proficient at taking out a certain type of enemy, they would upgrade it to a much more difficult type to deal with. And if you played too aggressively, more waves would show up to try to take you down. The game was even one of the first games, period, to include boss fights, here against the massive spaceship, the Andor Genesis. Another thing that had rarely ever been attempted, and another thing that Xevious did on its first try. Above any of those innovations, though, Endo wanted to push one thing the most with Xevious: the story. He wanted Xevious to be a game where players remembered the ship they piloted, the locations they were in, and who they were fighting. What I wanted to try doing with Xevious was, for the first time, to give a video game a consistent world and setting. Also, within the limitations of existing hardware, I wanted to create high-quality sprites. Finally, I wanted a story that wouldn't just be some tacked-on extra, but could actually stand on its own merits. The story of Xevious was cataloged in a 250-plus page novel written by Endo himself, Xevious the Fardrat Saga, telling the story of a millennium-long war between humans and the Gamp, a clone species of humans bred as a working-class race who eventually rebelled and conquered humanity, taking them off-planet to avoid a devastating ice age and leaving a small group on Earth. Soon, though, the Gamp reawaken ancient technology left on Earth and attempt an invasion, leaving the fate of Earth in the hands of pilot Mu, his robot friend Eve, and Gamp dissident Neo. The storyline was made in an attempt to give Xevious the feeling of an epic movie or anime series, with Mobile Suit Gundam especially serving as a big inspiration. Apparently not satisfied learning how to make a game on his own and writing a novel, Endo even wrote his own language, Xevian, to use in the game, which featured its own alphabet and unique words. The language, which has barely been used in any Xevious game, would go on to become an Easter egg used in various Namco properties, as recently as the Pac-Man episode of Secret Level. All of this work from Endo and his team went on to make a success that rivaled both Pac-Man and Space Invaders. Xevious was considered groundbreaking for the time it was released, and sold thousands of cabinets. Xevious became the very first must-own game for Nintendo's burgeoning Famicom, released in 1984, a full year before Super Mario Bros. Over 2 million copies sold across Japan and the US made it a huge success, even inspiring a young pair of kids to make their own fanzine and name Xevious as the best game on the market. That fanzine's name? Game Freak. Without Xevious, you don't get Furret. The game would also go on to get a few new versions, like Fardrat Saga, Super Xevious, and Fardrot Densetsu, but something missing from these games was Endo himself. Endo left Namco in 1985 to form his own game studio. The game studio was called Game Studio. He burned all the creativity on Xevious, but thankfully didn't call it Business Incorporated. Endo not being there to shepherd the franchise through the subsequent games explains why none of them even had a fraction of the cultural impact the original did. Regardless of the failures to capitalize on the success of the original, that original was so successful that it could fail all it wanted. Xevious was right alongside Pac-Man and Space Invaders as an all-time classic with no real follow-up that just kind of exists now without anything to really prop up the series, but just exists on brand recognition. You know, that's why when the 20th anniversary of Xevious rolled around, Namco decided to celebrate in style. As early as February 8th, 2002, Namco announced that for Xevious' 20th anniversary, there would be a feature-length Xevious movie set for release in August of the same year. When you first heard that this was a movie about Xevious, if you even knew what Xevious was, you were probably confused. How would you adapt Galaga featuring Wiracocha Raska into a movie? Knowing now that Xevious had a very rich and detailed lore to work with, though, means that a movie isn't as far-fetched as it seems. In fact, it seems like a slam dunk, given how much it was inspired by stuff like Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, and Space Runaway Ideon. Namco would be producing the movie, while distribution would be handled by Groove Corporation. An odd choice to handle an animated film, since the distribution company had never distributed an animated film before. In fact, before Xevious, Groove Corporation had barely distributed anything. Groove was a video rental store management company who, on the side, would distribute indie films. And by the time they would close down, they would only distribute 15 films. 2002, though, was the company's biggest year ever in terms of distribution, with 6 new anime and tokusatsu releases scheduled for that year. These would include web-exclusive OVAs like Six Angels, a cyborg girl tokusatsu series named Weckers, and a full anime series named Geisters. Heck, Xevious wasn't even the only video game property on their docket, as alongside SNK and ARMS Animation, they would be releasing the Nakaruru Samurai Showdown OVAs, based on Nakaruru's own independent game. SNK wins again! The crew that Namco got together for the production of Xevious was a real who's that of the industry, as almost everybody in every major role was an unknown, whose resume did not at all match what roles they were being given. The film's director, Kazumichi Kiyono, only has 1 credit to his name prior to Xevious, and that was back in 1984 as the CG production manager on the movie Lensman. His next credit wouldn't come for another 17 years in 2019 as a producer on an episode of Rinshin Ikoda-chan. The animation director on the humans in the movie would be Hironori Takano, who would go on to become an accomplished artist and do work with the Disgaea series, but by 2002 he only had 3 game credits to his name, only one of which being with Namco as a background designer on the game Summon Night. You think 3 games is bad? That's when you remember this is a movie! Takano had 0 film credits and was now the director on half of the film's animation. The animation director on the machines in the movie would be Masaharu Ogawa, whose only major credits are as a visual effects artist on Godzilla and Ultraman. Nobody who was set to direct on this movie had ever directed anything before, but at least they existed before the Xevious movie and still existed afterwards. Writer Shido Shimaone and producer Kazumichi Seno flat out don't exist by the looks of it. No credits, no profiles, nothing. The company who would be doing the computer graphics for the movie, Ogawa Modeling, is another such case of a group with 0 credits or background to their name being tasked with working on the film. Though, As you can guess by that name, it was Masahiro Ogawa's production company working on it. Heck, the only people with a notable list of credits are the actors, with the voice of the main character's girlfriend being Ryoka Yuzuki, famous for her roles as Ino in Naruto, Satsuki in Kill la Kill, and in Melty Blood as The comic relief sidekick Robot is voiced by Kai Araki, who's best known for her role as Chibi Moon in Sailor Moon, but the most famous voice talent is, funnily enough, the incidentals. Some of the no-name pilots in the movie are voiced by the likes of Koji Yusa and Kazuya Nakai. If you ever wanted to hear Shadow the Hedgehog and Roanoa Zoro get shot down in spaceships, you still can't, but we'll get to that. Why was the crew for Xevious so shoestring? Why couldn't Namco afford to bring in professionals who had experience in these roles to fill them? Well, that could have something to do with the fact that since 1998, Namco had been in a downward spiral. After the 1998 Japanese recession caused a general downturn in the video game industry, along with a massive drop-off in arcade profits, which is where Namco had invested most of their money, they were in a dire financial state. From 1998 to 2001, their sales dropped anywhere from 21% to 95% every year, reporting billions of yen in losses in every financial report. This sounds like a joke, but the only thing keeping the company alive was that they made Taiko no Tatsujin. This little bastard had the hopes and dreams of hundreds of employees on his back. Their money troubles, though, are likely what led to the production working with people who were underqualified, but also under budget. In the long list of unknowns who made up the credits of Xevious, though, was one name that was critically missing, and that was Masanobu Endo. Endo's name isn't credited anywhere on the film, not even as a special thanks credit, and to try to make something like this without even so much as a consultation credit for the person responsible for the entire story you were adapting was a really good explanation for how things turned out the way they did. The reason he wasn't contacted was because it would be kind of redundant to get his input on a story that was nothing like his own. The Xevious movie script would be a very loose adaptation of that Xevious story you learned about not too long ago, with the entire backstory about an ancient human race being dropped. All the characters, even the planet Xevious, wouldn't be mentioned in the Xevious movie. The only things sticking around would be the supercomputer that created the GAMP, and the plot to invade Earth, this time powered by absorbing Jupiter's atmosphere. Mu from the original story was now Takeru, who meets an android named Rumi who looks exactly like his missing girlfriend, and the two team up to destroy the GAMP and save the Earth. While Xevious's original story was obviously nothing mind-blowing when it came to space fiction, the changes here just make you ask, why was this a Xevious movie if you weren't going to adapt the Xevious story? The book it's based on is only 3 chapters long! That's all on Namco's side of the equation though, so what was Groove doing to help the movie? Well, under their G-Station publishing branch, Groove planned on doing a roadshow viewing of 3 movies, those being Angel 6, Geisters, and Xevious. Roadshows are a style of movie presentation where a group of films will tour Japan and hit all sorts of big movie theaters, kinda like a traveling film festival. With the flyer put out for Xevious's release, things were looking pretty good. I mean, the film's art style is that classic 90s anime style with the big eyes and the big hair, and the mech designs look pretty... Oh, sorry, that's for Angel 6. Well, down below we can see the real movie, and it has shades of that Masame Obare style that just screams classic anime to me. So it'll probably still be... Oh, no, that's Geisters. Please don't be the one in the middle. Please don't be the one in the middle. It's the one in the middle. Yes, the film would be rendered entirely in CG, which, if these renders, as well as the ones bordering the movie's standalone poster are to be believed, is... bad. This would look kinda good for a game made in 1997, made to try to cash in on Final Fantasy VII. Except by 2002, Final Fantasy looked like this. That standalone poster, though, has been stuck in my head for months. Something about it is so beautiful. Between the strange temple design with carvings reminiscent of the Nazca lines from the base game, overlooking the Earth to show it as alien and threatening, this is such a beautiful poster. However, looking back at that original poster, you wouldn't guess that Xevious was anything more than a short that played before the other two, given how much smaller it is on the poster. Or that it was the only original movie playing at the Roadshow. Angel 6 and Geisters were simply the episodes from each series hacked together to make something long enough to call a movie. Xevious was a rose between two thorns, an actual movie sandwiched between two Legends of the Crystal Coconut. So the faithful day of August 3rd came around as crowds flocked to see the movie. Then on August 10th it actually came out. Delays can be a bitch. The first stop on the tour was to Toho Cinema's Ikebukuro, a famous movie theater. In a mall, in a train station, in Ikebukuro. At this stop, people who managed to find the movie were greeted with the chance to pick up some trinkets, like a CD with Xevious music, or a pamphlet of information that goes along with the movie. These aren't a rare sight to see with Japanese movies aimed at a younger audience. I know the Dragon Ball movies all came with one, and I'm sure other movies did too, but who'd have guessed that by holding on to them, people would have one of the last looks at the movie anybody would ever get. Once you got into the theater, you lived the dream of people with too much interest in obscure lost media and watched the Xevious movie. And exclusive to this first showing, the people claiming to have worked on the movie, like Kazumichi Seno and Hironori Takano, would take the stage after it was finished and give people some insight as to what they had done and how sorry they were. Kazumichi Seno seemed to have known the con was up, as when it was his turn to speak, he gave very weird answers. Xevious was originally a game, but this time, it's a movie. So it's completely different. The original game was a groundbreaking work that introduced new visuals to the gaming world around the world. But 10 years have passed, and when thinking about future developments, I thought it might be okay to step into a different world other than just games. So I thought I'd like to experiment with a one-source, multiple-use format. I used Namco's CG technology to jump into a completely different genre, and also gathered staff who had no connection to games to breathe a different life into the game. When adapting it into a movie, we tried to overcome the considerable amount of time, 75 minutes, by using various techniques to move the characters. What the fuck is he talking about? The other three who showed up were tragically more coherent, but one of them let slip a little detail to show just how terrible the production of this movie had really gone. You had Seno talking about how getting to 75 minutes on this movie was like pulling teeth, and how the staff had no connection to the game, but what Takano would say after was even more damning. It's quite difficult to release such a work in theaters, and I was worried at one point, but I'm honored that everyone was able to see it. Masaharu Ogawa was in charge of the mechanics, and a system called a puppet was used to move the characters. And it was difficult to combine various adventurous technologies that no one had ever tried before, such as performing the normal rendering process in real time. Also, unlike regular movies, there was no director in charge of the overall direction, and the expert system in charge of each department was also experimental. So it was difficult, but I think I was able to feel the possibilities. This movie had 3 directors, and no directors. The way he says it makes it sound like each department of the movie, like writing, music, acting, and both forms of animation direction, were done independent from the rest without a singular uniting vision. Which, if that's true, wow, what a bad idea! Also makes you ask, if this movie had no single director, what the hell was Kazumichi Kiyono doing? Anyway, the rest of the crew takes Senno off the stage before he starts speaking in tongues again, and the crowd goes... on the train, probably. August 11th, time for the next stop on the road show, so fans line up outside... Toho Cinema's Ikebukuro? Oh no. Yeah, this road show had hit a road block and was at the end of the line. There were no other stops planned on the road show except Ikebukuro, which means that for the next 5 days, 4 times a day, they would play these 3 movies, 2 of which were clip shows, 1 of which was a movie, and 0 of which were good. Attendance dwindled day after day until it limped across the finish line on August 16th, and the roadshow ended, having never moved once. You're in a train station! Just ride the line to the next stop and siege their movie theater. How did those who saw one of the 24 screenings of the movie like it? Well, they didn't! There aren't a huge amount of reviews online, given the age of the movie and its general obscurity outside of its lost media status, but the ones I found were less than kind, citing terrible graphics, a nonsensical plot, and uninteresting characters as the major issues. Film critic Kei Hattori, who got an early screening back in May, commented that where the game had dazzling graphics that made even him, a non-gamer, marvel at it, the movie left a lot to be desired, and noted how Endo's name was nowhere attached to the credits. This blog by a guy named Chun36Jet has a pretty funny review of the movie, cutting himself off when he calls the CG cheap, and commenting on the idea of somebody asking a girl on a date to go see the Xevious movie. He was kinder than Hattori was, saying that the ending when the Andor Genesis appears like in the game was the best part, and that it was a movie he didn't regret paying the 1,700 yen to see. Conclusion: to enjoy this movie, it's important to compromise. The final review I could find was from a Twitter user named Ramael Pakal, who recalled the movie when a trend had popped up asking people what movies they would never forget. He recalled Xevious as being the type of movie that made him scream, "I want my money back!" and would agree with a comparison between the movie and a doujinshi, or self-published manga, where the cover looked nice, but the insides were garbage. In all fairness, it is a really good poster. Well, we'd all get a chance to see just how bad it was about a month after the movie left theaters, as we had gotten a confirmed date for the movie's home video release. G-Station Files, an official magazine all about anime distributed by a studio who had only made bad ones, had confirmed on the cover of their 6th issue, released in August, that the film would be coming to VHS and DVD on September 25th of the same year. Except September 25th came and went with no release. Days passed after the set release date, and it never came out. Weeks and months passed, and there was still no word on the movie. Or any word from Groove themselves. The last thing they said was goodbye, because in June of the next year, they filed for bankruptcy. 10 months after the release of Xevious, and the home video release never materialized. Without an official release, and no fan recordings of the movie, that meant that in an instant, the Xevious movie was gone forever. No, that can't be true. If Groove was going out of business, that would mean the rights reverted to Namco and they could publish the movie, right? Well, that might have been how it worked, if there was a movie to release. See, when it comes to film preservation, you either have a master copy, or you have an inherently inferior version. If you want to preserve a film properly, you need a master. One of my other lost media white whales is a similar case, with the Fist of the North Star movie's uncensored cut. The film featured extreme gore and violence during its theatrical run, so when it came to home media, the film got heavily censored to obscure most of the gore. How the original master copy was lost varies depending on the source, with explanations ranging from the original being destroyed in a fire, to the censorship being done by smearing the original master in Vaseline. As of today, the closest we got to recreating the original is done by splicing in clips from Italian trailers to try to recreate the lost scenes. All of this is to say that without a master copy, Namco would be just as lost as the rest of us. And when Groove Corporation folded in June of 2003, there was no master copy to be found. Where did it go? Well, this gets a little murky. There's no official reason given as to where the master copies went, but the most widespread theory online is that the CEO of the Groove Corporation, seeing that the company was going under, stole a large amount of money and the master copies to a few of their projects, and then vanished off the face of the earth. This would explain why Groove went out of business, and why the Xevious movie was completely lost. Now allow me to put on my suspicion suspenders and ask, what the hell are you talking about? I think that if a major film company, a film company's CEO ran away with the bag and pieced out to parts unknown, there might be a news story about it, or even just an official account that that's what happened. Such a thing is not mentioned in any of the news stories I found discussing the death of Groove. And I can't even find an official source as to where this story started, outside of random blog posts. And let me tell you, if you're a journalist and given the chance to write about how a business was shuttered thanks to something like this, you're gonna write about it! What really gets me is the idea that he stole the master copy to Xevious along with the money. Why would he do that? What benefit is there to stealing the master? Are you gonna release it? Are you gonna try and pawn it off? Hold it up for money? Aside from how fake the story sounds, that's why I can't believe it. But it might not be wrong. The problem with dismissing this idea altogether is that something did happen. The Xevious master copy went missing, but that's not the only thing that did. Remember back when I was going over the projects Groove had lined up and mentioned the Nakaruru Samurai Showdown OVA? Groove released the first part, but there was intended to be a second episode, which, for some reason, never came out. Geisters, as well, suffered as plans originally called for 2 Geister compilation movies, the first one covering the first half of the series, while the second one covered the ending. We know this one was definitely meant to be produced, as, unlike the Nakaruru OVA, we have proof in the form of the same flyer that promoted Xevious. You can clearly see that there's meant to be a first movie and a second one. Neither of these re-edited movies ever saw a release. Though, with the series itself being readily available, this is much less of an egregious case than what happened to Xevious. So clearly, something happened at Groove between the releases of Xevious during the Roadshow and the September 25th date for the home video releases. Something major enough to affect 3 of their 6 major productions. Like I said, I don't believe the CEO story because it's so out there with not enough proof to justify it, but what else could be so catastrophic that it could cause a shift this major? All that really matters, though, is the fact that no one either had a copy or was willing to release it. And for the next 15 years, that would be the case. 0 footage or information about the movie ever surfaced. And, unfortunately, even less people cared. The film existed for about a week. It's existed more as a snippet on a Wikipedia article simply saying a movie happened than it did being seen. Given its extremely short run in theaters and poor reception, there's no nostalgia or fandom surrounding it that many lost media cases need in order to resurface. It's a case of the movie staying lost because nobody cared to find it. Important to note that if you do want to search for the movie, you might come across this 2-minute piece of 3D Xevious animation, but this is unrelated from the lost movie. This was actually a short made for the NCGA short film competition by Namco, and this came out in 1989. Crazy that despite being 13 years older, it kinda looks better than the movie. In 2017, though, we would get the first break in the case in a long, long time. a Twitter user named Hazuki would break the dry spell and upload a few screenshots from a promotional DVD. The first time any new footage of the movie had been seen in over a decade. Granted, there wasn't much of it, and it was poor quality, but hey, 4 specks of dust is more dust than I had before. This did raise an important question. What was the DVD these screenshots were taken from? Hazuki mentioned getting the disc when pre-ordering the movie before its cancellation, which meant that there was a new separate source of Xevious information that could be found and we could at least recover a bit of the film. Unfortunately, as you can see, it didn't really get much traction, and still we have no more information about the Xevious movie. For another 7 years. On June 17th, 2024, there was a breakthrough. YouTuber R&D Stranger would upload 2 videos, one detailing the history of the movie, as well as showing and discussing a trailer for the movie that had been found on a G-Station promotional DVD. This was a DVD sent across Japan to various video stores meant to drum up hype for the various anime and tokusatsu that Groove Corporation was putting out. And on the DVD was the biggest break the case would ever get. A 1 minute and 30-second trailer for Xevious. Stranger had found the DVD while browsing Surugaya, a site in Japan for selling used media, and when looking up Xevious, he just so happened to stumble across the DVD between throw pillows and statues of the spaceships. Comparing it to the nothing we had before, this was the holy grail of new footage, showing us the film in action for the first time ever since its original theatrical run. This trailer also helps to confirm a lot of the accounts that we got from those earlier reviews. We don't get to see how the human characters would have looked in the movie, but there is a brief clip towards the end showing the ship flying through an area that looks a lot like the original Xevious, just like in the Chunjet review. As well, it confirms the original August 3rd release date that got pushed back a week. We also got to see how Namco and Groove chose to advertise the movie with these little quotes put into the trailer. 2 of these quotes were, "Xevious, the original shoot-'em-up, is now in theaters," and "Xevious, the movie, has finally been unveiled." That is the same quote twice. It also says, "The detailed computer graphics are a masterpiece." That is not a quote. Despite how much new stuff we had, thanks to Stranger finding the DVD, unfortunately it still doesn't amount to a whole lot. We now got to see the movie in action, which is cool. The dogfighting looks fine, and the one scene that looks like Xevious had some cool effects, but unfortunately it doesn't give us a lot to chew on, and worse yet, it was now a dead end. Comparing the screenshots from Hazuki to the DVD revealed they're definitely the same thing, so it's not like there's a second DVD to hunt for. The one lead we had was now closed, and we're back to square one. Except, there was one last place to look. See, it had been assumed that Namco wouldn't have a copy on account of the Groove CEO story, and how they had never commented on the movie before. Except 4 years prior, on November 27th, 2020, Namco would release part 2 of a 12-part documentary, cataloging the history of their famous retro games, and that second part was about Xevious. It's a kinda useful source for information, has some cool stuff on it. But 4 minutes and 30 seconds into this 4-minute and 48-second video, they discuss for about 5 seconds Xevious' transition to other forms of media. And those 4 seconds go along with 4 new seconds of Xevious movie footage. These shots are nowhere on the promotional DVD and have never been seen before. The video makes no reference to this new footage, doesn't point it out, doesn't even specify that there is a Xevious movie. Just raw throws out previously unseen footage of the movie and then moves on. What the fuck? So this can only mean that Namco has more footage than we realized. Either a work print of the uncompleted film, or even a fully completed master version. There's really no way of knowing, given how tight-lipped they've been up until this point, and given how they didn't even regard the new footage they released. Perhaps Namco does have a copy of the movie after all, and simply elected not to release it due to the poor reception. It's not unbelievable to think a company would try to ignore a critical and financial failure like the Xevious movie, but even then, this could be the only remaining copy of this film in the world. Namco may have shuttered the release of the movie to bury it and forget it ever happened. And that's why it didn't get a home video release. It doesn't explain what happened to the Samurai Showdown OVA or Geister's movies, but it's a more believable explanation than the CEO flying off in a jetpack with film canisters under his arms. Unfortunately, this is the bitter ending that comes with most lost media cases. There is no satisfying conclusion, not yet at least. No leaked copy from Namco, no master copy found in a church basement. The movie as it is still totally lost. Perhaps there are still ways we can try to find the movie. If somebody at Namco doesn't really value their job, they could always try leaking the movie, if it's even there. And the Kei Hattori review of the movie did mention an advanced screening in May, so perhaps wherever he saw it might have a copy of the movie? That's about the best we can hope for, though. Maybe somebody at Namco will leak it, maybe the original master will turn up. I don't know. I wish I had a more positive way to conclude things, but frankly, it'll take a miracle for this movie to ever get released. It is funny to take a step back and think about how badly we want to see a movie that, to all its known viewers, is terrible. But I don't think the quality of media should really impact the need to preserve it. Regardless of how good it turns out to be, it's still the result of dozens of people coming together and trying their hardest to make something good. Did it work? Apparently no, but does that mean it should just be thrown into a fire? No. All that effort deserves to be preserved, learned from, and remembered. Preservation like this is truly the preservation of time and effort, and not letting so much work simply vanish. Everything from feature-length films to full-on albums to video games to even stupid little bumpers between commercials deserves to be preserved, simply because it's somebody's work. It doesn't matter if they were passionate about it, if it was good, or even if they really cared about it, it was still their time and effort that went into making it. Hopefully Namco, or whoever ended up getting the master copy after the Groove CEO crashed into the side of a building with his jetpack, will release it one day. Because at this point, I don't care if the film is pieces of paper on popsicle sticks, I just gotta see it.